Hey guys, happy Friday and welcome to the Collaboration Conversation Season 4.
That's crazy.
I know it. The Collaboration Conversation is a listener-supported video podcast where Christian artists, entrepreneurs, and friends can share about their upcoming projects and how they are using the gifts and the talents that God has given them. To what end, of course, as always, is to share the good news of King Jesus. Today, our very special guest is Mark Taylor. Mark is the former editor and publisher of the Christian Standard magazine, and he served as the Christian Standard editor from 2003 to 2017 when he retired in June after almost 41 years with Standard Publishing. He has started a new ministry called Unchosen Journey, and we are so glad to have him here to share his story with us and to kind of share with us about this new chapter of life that he finds himself in. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here, Mark.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And I think our guests kind of know that before we jump in, we always have like a little conversation before, and it just was so cool to watch you two talk about all of the family friends that we have, and just it's such a small world. And so I'm excited to get to know you better, and I know my mom is as well.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Well, Grandma Sharon Carter,
we love her. Shout out to her.
Amen. She's awesome, and she messaged me, I don't know, a couple months ago, and she said, "Oh, I've got somebody for you." So she recommended that we reach out, and I did. And
anytime Grandma Sharon recommends anybody,
well, yeah, we say yes. Yes, ma'am.
We don't. There's no questions.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely.
Yeah. She's definitely got our best interest.
And, yeah, for sure.
Well, in fact, she was just down here a month or so ago, so it was very nice to meet her. To see
her.
Sorry, she drove down from Ohio, and we had a good time.
Yeah.
But anyway, you and my grandpa, you worked together for years and years, and then apparently roommates with one of my uncles, and the connection. You might know my family better than I do because I was in California. It's very possible.
I doubt that.
But anyway, it's so great to meet you. And I know that you have a hard story, but it's a story that I think a lot of people is going to resonate with. And so we really felt it would be important to chat with you and to hear your story. So if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about you currently, where you're at, wife, kids, what you got going.
My wife and I live where we've lived for almost 20 years. In fact, we've lived in Cincinnati since I started that at Standard for that 41-year career. Now I've been retired. 6 years? So is it 6 years or 5 years? Anyway, we still live in Greater Cincinnati. We live north of town in a community called Liberty Township. We go to church over in Mason, which is east of here. Our kids are grown and gone. My son's a school teacher in New York, lives in New York City. And my daughter is in charge of communications for Johnson University in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Oh.
And so, she married a fella with two kids who are now, one's graduated from college, one's in college. And my son and his wife, who live in New York, have a 5.5-year-old kindergartner, which is pretty
cute.
Special.
Yeah.
They were married 14 years before he came into the world, and we sort of thought that they loved New York. We didn't think that we were going to have a grandchild there. So when that happened, we were kind of blown off our chairs. And
I bet.
Oh, but that's sweet.
That's awesome.
They need to move closer.
I know.
Right.
Or just get y'all a place up there. One of the two.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, good. We want to talk about. Let's talk about your story. And you were talking about. Well, no. Let's do this first, real quick. Let's talk about your career. What all did you do at Standard Publishing?
Well, I went to Standard Publishing in 1976 as editor of the Lookout magazine. I still can't believe that I was hired to do that at that young age. And I did that for about 14 years also. At that time, the Lookout was widely circulated in adult Bible classes, mostly in Christian churches, but not exclusively in Christian churches. And at that time, I calculated it probably had the widest circulation of any journal that was circulated among Christian churches and churches.
Wow. Yeah.
Or at least the instrumental Christian churches.
Yeah.
Of course, that has fallen off as all print publications have. But I did that for about 14 years, and then I did a number of things in administration, worked in marketing for a little while, had various administrative roles at Standard, and the org chart kept changing, things kept getting juggled around, but Then I ended my career as editor of Christian Standard for those 14 years or so, and that was a very satisfying way to end. Actually, I liked the work of creating the magazine and working with people to put it together more than I had enjoyed the management administrative stuff that I'd done before. And so it was a blessing to get to do that. It really was.
Well, I got to ask you, this isn't the reason we are having you on our podcast, because you've got a ministry that we're excited to hear about. But one of the things that we love to do is ask folks how they got to where they are, to inspire young listeners who might, and I know that you mentioned that print publication is not necessarily what it was. Yeah, right. Yeah. But I'm curious about your education background, and maybe any tips you might have for someone who's interested in getting into editorial work.
There's loads of schools out there. I mean, the blessing for me was that Dr. Lewis Foster, who was dean of the graduate school of CCU, and Ralph Small, who was head of editorial at Standard Publishing, cooked up this notion to create an internship between Standard and Cincinnati Bible Seminary. And I got to do that. And that introduced me to the people there, taught me a lot. I'd been writing since I was a teenager. I took what Cincinnati offered, which wasn't probably enough by today's standards.
Yeah.
Was doing a lot of work for the school, writing and putting stuff together for them. And so Dr. Foster tapped me for this internship, and I got to know and got known, and that was kind of how it went. I mean, I certainly have learned a lot since then, but a lot of it's kind of self-taught. But
fair.
Yeah.
But did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I felt like that was. Yes, I really did want to do.
That's awesome.
I love when that happens. It rarely happens that way, but I love that.
I mean, it was a dream when I got, then in 1976, when I got tapped to come back to Standard full time, it was just like a dream come true. It was like, man, I have landed. This is exactly what I meant to do. I do think that I was only 26 years old. I do think that it was a bit of a problem to have reached that dream so young.
Yeah.
And, I didn't have enough people pushing me to grow beyond that. And frankly, at Standard, there weren't a lot of opportunities to grow professionally. I mean, there wasn't any ladder to climb up.
Right. You were at the top.
And so, it was a pretty short ladder.
But, right. Well, fair.
So that's something that I've thought a lot about since then. But it was great. And that's why I say that I did the Lookout for 14 years. I did the Christian Standard for 14 years. In between there, I did stuff, some of which I didn't enjoy as much or do as well at. So, God blessed, and I'm unhappy about where I am today.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've said this, but my grandpa worked there too. We did talk about this beforehand, but I just love it.
I worked with John Carter.
Yeah.
He ran the office there. He was the one who set up my little cubicle when I showed up for my internship that first day.
How cool.
He was the one we reported to if we had, sick days or whatever. And he ran production. And so he was the one interceding between us and the print shop and all the people in the back who were producing what we were creating.
Yeah.
So, I worked with him every week. And
I love that.
The highest admiration for him.
That's so cool.
Me too. Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned you're very happy with how that turned out to be where you are now, which is retired. And I know that 2 years into your retirement, just things kind of shifted significantly. So tell us a little bit about the last 4 years.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I retired in 2017, so I guess that's 5 years.
Yeah.
So, my wife had shown some things that I felt like we ought to investigate, and so she went through this round of neurological testing, and they came back with a label of mild cognitive impairment, which is common. It's often it's not even really a diagnosis, but it's often a label that precedes a firm diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. A year later, we did the cognitive testing again, and the neurologist started using the word Alzheimer's with us, but I was really in denial about that. I thought, well, no, 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 no. It's mild cognitive impairment and she's doing fine and we'll get along and we'll take the pills and it'll be fine. Well, it was a blessing. I just feel like God really blessed us because that doctor left the practice. I didn't like her. We didn't relate to her that well. And we were given another doctor who we love. I love. He's wonderful. He's
good.
Personable, but very thorough. I have a friend in the health field who said, well, personable and neurologists don't often go in the same sentence, but he really is. After meeting with him, he said, well, I just made the offhand comment. Well, I know you can't really conclusively diagnose Alzheimer's disease. He said, well, that's not true. He said, for about 10 years, we've been able to.
Oh.
And he urged us to take a test that we knew about, but I had avoided because I felt like, well, okay, it won't change the treatment course any, which I suppose that it hasn't, but they can do a spinal tap, take a little vial of spinal fluid, analyze it, evaluate the levels of amyloid and tau in the spinal fluid, and combined with symptoms that are present already, make a conclusive diagnosis that this is Alzheimer's.
Oh, wow.
So we had that meeting with him the week before Christmas in December of 2019. Great timing.
Jeez.
And I'm in retrospect, that was hard to hear, but I'm really glad that this wasn't 20 years ago and we weren't wondering, well, gee, what's going wrong? And gee, well, what about that? And I mean, it's just like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. And so we'll just move on. The truth will set you free. So we'll just move on. Not that it makes it easier, but you're not left confused and wondering and
right.
And that makes sense.
And in denial.
Yeah.
So, and then that was in December of 2019. And then a year ago, let me think now. I guess it was just last fall. We, the doctors, that neurologist, the sharp fella, saw a couple things he didn't like, or he was questioning.
Yeah.
So he sent Evelyn, my wife, for another test, and they did a brain scan. They insert these isotopes in the brain so that the scan will only show the dopamine levels in the brain.
Oh.
And in a typical brain, the dopamine, he shows a picture, the dopamine makes these commas on either side of the brain. It's colorful and bright. When he showed us Evelyn's picture, it was black. The MRI had not picked up any dopamine at all, which confirmed a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease.
Oh my
so
gosh.
We're dealing with a dual diagnosis, and a lot of times I wonder, well, what are we seeing here? Is this Parkinson's? Is this Alzheimer's? And I attend a wonderful support group. I can tell you more about that in a second.
Yeah.
The gal who's in charge of it said, don't try to figure that out. Just deal with what figure out how to deal with what you're dealing with. You don't have to figure out exactly what's causing it.
Oh, okay.
I do think that each diagnosis complicates how to handle the other.
Sure.
A person without Alzheimer's who has Parkinson's, they study and they know what's going on. They take their medicine. They do their exercises. They can tell you what's wrong, and that isn't always true for us.
Right.
So, anyway, I had thought about writing about this, but I didn't want to embarrass my wife, and she was very close about it. She didn't even want to tell our kids, but I persuaded her that we were going to tell their kids.
Yeah.
And a circle of close friends. And then last year at Christmas, I guess it was, 2 years in, I wrote a Christmas letter that to tell the world what was going on with us, because we have a lot of friends from all over the country that,
right.
I didn't feel like it was going to be right 5 years from now for them to find out that this is what we've been dealing with, and they're going to think, So I got Evelyn's permission. I read it to her and said, here's something we could send out. I said, what do you think? She said, oh, I think it's fine. So I got it in the mail quick before she changed her mind, and kind of went public. And I think I did something on Facebook about that also. I had So, I'm a talker and I am a verbal processor. And so I was talking to people who would say to me, well, Mark, are you going to write about this? And once that notion got planted in my head, and once we had already gone public with it and so forth, and these people were from three different parts of my life, one a former work colleague, one a family member, one a good friend, and confidant, I sort of felt like I couldn't get the notion out of my mind. So anyway, I did the work, found a fellow to create the design for it, a fellow that I'd been working with in another freelance but no unpaid project that I've worked on. And we created this blog called unchosenjourney.com, a caregiver's walk with Alzheimer's. And I don't know, that started this spring sometime. And I try to write something every week about just reflecting on my feelings or what's going on with us, how I'm reacting to it, what I'm learning from it, the questions I still have about it. And then I got this notion to invite other people to share their story. So that's been hard to get people to write, but I've gotten a number of folks who have told whatever they want to say about their own story as a caregiver. Yeah. Not all of them have been Alzheimer's caregivers. Some of them have been caregivers for other people who are severely disabled. But so that's been good. So I post on Wednesdays, and if I get the content, we post a shared story on Friday. Okay. And so that's been posting twice every week has been something to keep up with,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
But, we know, yeah.
You can imagine. That's why I was so sympathetic when you wanted me to do this. I thought, well, I know what it's like. For many, many years, I was responsible for weekly content. And, if you can find anything, any flame in the dark, you just fan it into the fire. So, anyway.
Well, for us, God really has blessed. He has sent amazing folks. So we really, I feel like we don't really struggle with that as much. But for you, yes, it's weekly content. You're writing, you're not writing somebody else's story.
It is therapeutic. And one of my concerns was that I didn't want this to be just this self-centered catharsis vomiting out into the world. I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to have some value for readers beyond just me getting it off my chest. And people have continued to say that it is. So yes. I'm gratified by that. I mean, I pray about that. God, use this. I don't want to just, it's just not an extra, I'm not wanting to get attention for myself,
Right. Yeah.
I think we all want to get attention for ourselves, but that's not a good enough reason to do it. And it's certainly given me sort of a sense of purpose and sort of a feeling like, well, there's a lot that I might be able to do that I can't do, but here's something that I can do.
Right. Yes.
In this situation.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, I actually have two questions. So let me ask this first one. Before her diagnosis, I am sure that you had some plans for retirement. What did you guys want to do? Did you want to travel or?
We did get to travel a lot. Actually starting maybe a year before I retired. And then those first couple of years, we did travel a lot. And I'm sure, of course, then COVID hit, but I'm sure we would be traveling again, and we would be traveling more. I tried, and we would be involved probably in service together in some way or another through the church or through some things I'm doing by myself now.
Right.
So I try not to think about that too much.
Yeah, that's smart.
Because there's really no future in trying to say, well, what could we have done? It's kind of like a parent who loses a child, and every year they try to figure out, okay, now they'd be 14, now they'd be 16. Well, now I think that's unavoidable to a degree, and it's not categorically negative, but it's not particularly productive.
Right.
Totally. I understand that.
Well, so I try to kind of push those thoughts away.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And we didn't really cover this at the time, and I should have asked this. From what I have read, Evelyn was very successful in her own right.
Yeah, she taught
professionally.
She taught for about 35 years at Cincinnati Christian University herself. She started part-time right after the time our second child was born, she was teaching classes in the business school there, and then
Okay.
they kind of phased that out. And our daughter was going to college, and she needed to go to work full time. And she talked to the dean, and the dean said, "Well, if you go back and get another degree, you can come in and teach in our English department." So she did that for about 35 years. And so
Wow.
we continue to hear from former students who reach out via Facebook, or one or two have even come to see us
Yeah.
because they have such high regard for her.
Oh, my word.
Absolutely.
yes.
You mentioned you guys love to travel. Where was her favorite place that y'all went?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that she would have identified a favorite place. I mean, we used to go to South Carolina often on vacation with the kids, and with others, we've been there several times. I think she liked that. I mean, we did some Europe stuff. She never really was big on flying, and there's always a lot of details and last minute stuff whenever you're with some sort of tour, which we did several things like that.
Sure.
With a group called Educational Opportunities. And so, but that's just too unpredictable, and it's just too much to try to do now. So we're not.
Oh, yeah.
not doing that.
You mentioned that it's hard to get content from others. Like you invite people to write in and for you to share it. And so you mentioned that, but I'm curious, what has the response been like, and how has that affected you to receive any responses?
Well, I've received a lot of response. I've been overwhelmed by
Yeah.
Oh,
people
good.
who come out of the woodwork to say, "Oh yeah, we have a former classmate. She wrote just this past week, who said, 'Oh yeah, my husband's had Alzheimer's for 3 years.' Well, we didn't know that."
Wow.
And people who've been caregivers for any number of situations, or who've seen this in their families or whatever, and with extended family, there's a huge percentage. I don't have it at my fingertips. I just was reading the statistics the other day. There's a huge percentage of Americans who are going to be affected with one type of dementia or another in their lifetime.
Oh, wow.
Alzheimer's is the most prevalent, but it's not the only type of dementia. So it's a situation that people resonate with, and so I've taken some comforts. I felt good about the fact that people seem to appreciate somebody else expressing what they have felt or what they've experienced. So that's been gratifying. Also, the responses have been gratifying. And of course, people that know Evelyn have commented with a lot of sympathy and concern. So
Yeah. I can just imagine, you mentioned that you're a verbal processor, and I can't relate with anything more. I'm such a verbal processor. But I know that everybody's not like that. So for those who maybe to be able to have the opportunity to jot down how they're feeling and send it to somebody who I am sure you have a glimpse of it, but I'm confident that the blessing that you have given to people, even if they haven't sent it in to you, they just had the opportunity to write it down. I'm sure that that's just been immeasurably helpful to folks.
I see people that say, "I read your blog. I appreciate it so much."
Oh, good.
I don't feel like I'm spitting in the wind. There's something in me that likes to promote, and but I'm not trying to. I mean, I think the days of building a huge following with a blog on the internet are kind of past. That phase is over. I think probably if you're out there trying to be a big influencer and you're not a celebrity, I think probably that there's another way to do that. But because there's such a fire hose of information out there.
Totally.
But not as much about Alzheimer's, although I have gotten acquainted with another gal whose husband has Alzheimer's, and she writes weekly about it also. And she actually shared a post for my blog a couple weeks ago.
Good.
But, so.
I think you might be surprised. I blogged for a while and thought the same thing. But there's a lot of people who just aren't in video. They still process by reading.
Yeah.
And they really do like that. So,
yeah.
well, and
I mean, I've tried to make it accessible to people who don't think they've landed on their faith journey. So that, I mean, obviously, none of us can survive without God's help and God's blessing. And so I don't want to keep God out of it. But I also have worked hard for this not to be a little power of positive thinking, Norman Vincent Peale, tie everything up with a bow at the end.
Yes.
Because that's not the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear. And so I don't think it's helpful not to acknowledge that. And some Christian folks, whenever they're posting about hard things in their life, feel compelled to wrap it all up
neatly,
with platitude at the end. And so I've tried to strike the right balance there because obviously we want to give God the glory. And I've written about some answered prayers and things that he deserves the glory for.
Yeah.
But I've not made it, I don't intend for it to be a devotion or to teach a little Christian lesson every week.
Right.
I don't think that
that's appropriate. Yeah.
It's not, I don't think if there's any chance for it to have a wider reach, I think that that's the tone that it needs to take.
Right.
Oh yeah. And I just want to affirm that because I think especially in my generation and in younger generations, there's this frustration with the church feeling like everything has to look and be perfect. And life is so messy.
Yeah.
And there's this feeling that Christians just have it all together and are totally fine with grief and don't have to deal with it because they've got Jesus. And don't get me wrong, Jesus is enough. I know that. But you know what I'm saying? Yep. And so for you to be setting that example of like, I am going through the toughest thing imaginable.
Right.
And I also have Jesus and he's there. You know what I'm saying? I just think that that's really important to not platitude it. And that's awesome.
Early on in not long after the diagnosis, a friend sent me a book that his pastor had written that later became Book of the Year through Christianity Today, I think. And I think it's called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, and Rediscovering the Grace of Lament. If that's not the right title, you'll find the book cover on Amazon. Put it up beside my face here while this.
Okay.
We can do that.
And in it, he examines for us what the Bible says, all the rich Bible literature about lament, and helps us learn to lament and embrace it and not deny it, and use it to bring ourselves closer to God. And I think that's an element of worship in most of the churches we know today that is missing. And so people don't know how. If they want to shake their fist at God, they feel guilty about that.
Right.
The fact is, the psalmist did that.
Yes.
So we need to understand how to do it also and what that can accomplish. And that's been been very helpful to me.
Yeah. What an incredible life lesson. It's crazy that I didn't make this connection, but, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but as you know, my stepmom took care, was the caregiver for my father until he passed away last year. Yeah. And I mean, that was 24/7. She was having to get help because he was needing medical attention all day, every day for a while there. But the same on my dad's side, my father-in-law just passed away earlier this year, and his wife was a caregiver for 25 years.
Oh.
He was in a wheelchair, and he suffered with
honestly more than that, probably to some extent.
And his was muscular dystrophy.
Yeah.
So it's just weird. Both of my father and my husband's father were in wheelchairs for the last 10, 15 years. I think we're going to have you on and hopefully we'll connect you with somebody, but it's me.
Yeah.
I'm connecting with you.
While you were talking, I was able to listen to you and double check that book is called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, Discovering the Grace of Lament. It's written by a fellow named Mark Vroegop, Vroegop. And you can get it anywhere. He's written a second book after that about lamenting racial injustice. I haven't read that one, but I read the book and it just started moving me. I started crying after we're 3 pages in. Johnny Erickson Tata writes the foreword to it, and it's
good.
Quite beautiful.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, of the blogs that I have seen, I've not read them all. I think for some reason, one of the ones that stood out was a recent one where you talked about going on vacation. and how hard that was. What was the story there?
Well, my daughter-in-law, and this is the mom of the 5-year-old, 5.5-year-old. She and my son have, throughout their marriage, they've traveled all over the world. Travel is a big value to them. They have these wonderful vacations, and for several years, they've arranged a summer vacation for them and my wife and me and her parents. So the 6, 7 of us are all together someplace. Maybe it's a house on the beach, or one year we went to Europe together. And they'd been planning a trip to Banff for a long time, and then COVID hit, and that got delayed 2 years in a row. And finally, it became clear when it was time to do that Evelyn probably wasn't up to that trip. So
yes.
My daughter graciously agreed to come hang with her mom for about a week while I was gone on vacation with them.
Yes.
And Banff is just astoundingly beautiful. I had no idea how beautiful Banff is. You all ought to go. Put it on your bucket list.
Okay. Will do.
I knew that it was. My daughter-in-law always plans wonderful trips. I knew it'd be fine, but when I got there, I was just blown away by the beauty. You're not, some places you go and see the mountains, but in Banff you're just kind of surrounded by the mountains and these magnificent waterfalls and mountain lakes with this this beautiful color created by the silt that's created by the glaciers running off of the sides of the mountains.
Yeah.
So so we did that for a week, and it's the first vacation that I've taken leaving my wife behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge. The next one probably won't be as hard because I know that she can't do it. But
right. Well, and she's in good hands.
That whole what might have been song.
Yeah.
It's hard not to play.
Sure,
right.
Of course.
Well, so you have, quite a few blog entries on your website. You're going to put them all together in a book at some point?
I have no plan to do that.
Okay.
That certainly wasn't my intent going in. More than one person has mentioned that. I don't think that they're publishable as a book in their current format. That would take more work than it probably sounds like. Could be after a couple years or with some perspective or whatever, I might feel compelled to draw from all of that content and do something more with it. I'm open to that idea.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I'm not strategizing toward that, saying, okay, this would be that in chapter 3 of the book. I'm just
You're not there yet.
Trying to get by.
I gotcha.
Right.
Well, gosh, this seems so, and I'm going to take a second to acknowledge that we have had this conversation several times about how privileged the conversation that we bring to the table is, and like the topics that or the topic of our podcast and the ministry that we have. It's a very privileged conversation. And so it feels a little odd in this space to ask, but I do think we should ask.
Oh, yes.
But our podcast and our ministry is all about equipping and encouraging Christians to tap into their talents and their gifts to build in collaboration with God their brick that they can give to, as an offering to God as he built his kingdom. And so that's why we call it Project Brickworks. It's, this brick that we're building. And I can just tell in the 41 years in your career, but then also now in retirement and the work you're doing and the blessing you've been to others through the blog, you have got a beautiful brick. And so I just would love to chat with you about the talents and the gifts that you believe God has given you, that you've used throughout your career, through this, through the blog. And so, that's the topic of our ministry. So we always want to make sure we ask and encourage folks to name their talents and gifts to give God the honor for that as well.
I think one lesson for us is that we may be surprised at how God chooses to use the talent that we have. And I think the challenge is to be ready to be used in ways that become available, even when ways we might have wished are not available. I have a friend who does a lot with personality analysis and gifts analysis and all that stuff. and he says that he calls me an expressive, which I think is a more accurate descriptor than to say a creative person, because creative is taking something out of nothing. I mean, the guy who wrote Hamilton is truly creative, but I do feel compelled to share, and that's why I think that the publishing thing and the cranking out those magazines every week was very satisfying to me, because there was something to be shared, and
Yes.
this was a way to express it, and putting it together in the right way, and commenting on it in the editorial, and helping to find the art that would express it well, and all that was very, very, very satisfying to me. And so I think that's why when people said to me, well, are you going to write about this? The notion of doing something more than just post on Facebook every week, but actually putting something out there that would be perhaps discovered more broadly. I just couldn't, once that idea took seed in me, I just couldn't get it out of my craw. So, and my friend also says that he feels like I'm a person who wants to be an influencer, which is nothing. It's just, it's who I am. It's not unique to me. A lot of people feel that way. And I think that's also why I feel compelled to try to, I'm willing to do the work to send out a newsletter every week to those who will subscribe, to say, okay, here's this week's content, and so forth and so on, because it is, I didn't, it sounds a little bit egotistical, but I think it is important to me to feel like I'm putting something out there that others are reacting to.
Yeah.
There's some influence there. So I think that is my best answer to your question about that.
Well, so you did mention earlier that you are part of a support group, and I really would like to know more about that. You know, not only your journey, but any encouragement that you might have for somebody else who's in your shoes, so to speak.
Well, I resisted the notion of joining a support group for quite a while, and then I decided, I think this would be good. I guess it's because I like to talk. I need to talk out loud about stuff. I contacted the Alzheimer's Association, which is a great resource for folks. But they, at that time, they weren't doing in-person support groups. They were only doing online support groups. They put me in touch with a lady who is employed by a corporation or a foundation called HFC. It stood originally for Hilarity for Charity. I think they're getting away from that. It's run by the actor Seth Rogen and his wife. I believe she had a parent maybe who suffered, or grandparent who suffered with Alzheimer's. They have created this foundation to support caregivers and to support Alzheimer's research. But their main focus is on Alzheimer's caregivers. Wow. So they have employed a network of trained, licensed, experienced social worker type people to facilitate the support groups.
Wow.
So we meet once a week via Zoom. It's wonderful. There's people, about 10 of us from all over the country, a variety of situations. But what's great about it is the lady who facilitates our group has been doing geriatric care and seniors stuff and caregiver care for her whole career. And so whenever anybody raises a question, we share with each other what's going on. And then invariably she will say, well, you know, one thing you might think about is, or something we often see is, or what I've told my clients when they've asked me that is, and it's almost like going to a counselor every week. And so it's been absolutely wonderful.
Wow.
I think if you scroll down their homepage, it's just, I don't know, if you look up HFC Alzheimer's, you'll find it.
Okay.
And if you scroll down their page, there's a link to link to the care groups, the support groups, and you can get hooked up. They also have drop-in groups. I have a friend who hasn't been able to commit to a weekly session, but he's got this drop-in group that he can go to when he's available, and sometimes he's been the only one dropping in.
Yeah.
And so he's been able to talk to the counselor. You know, so it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. They offer more than I've tapped into, but it has been a great thing. I'm surprised at how much I look forward to it every week. Just an hour. That's the other thing. I would never do I would never do an in-person support group after this. Because you
Oh,
don't have
wow.
to drive, you don't have to get dressed, you don't have to. You're there. It's an hour. You're done. Just sneak it in your morning.
Yeah, that's
And,
great.
it's
Well,
great.
good.
That's awesome. I do know a little bit about support groups, online virtual weekly support groups. I went to one and kind of drop in, as you would say, for a support group for eating disorders that I go to. And one of the biggest topics in a very different space than you would probably talk about it, but it's all related, is that we talk about grief a lot. We talk about grief of time. We talk about body grief, like the body we are told we're supposed to have by diet culture and just all of these things. We talk about grief in so many different capacities, especially with trauma, things like that. And so I know that grief has been a big part of what you write about and your journey. And so I would love to open the table, so to speak, or the floor, so to speak, for you to share with us a little bit about your thoughts on grief and processing.
Well, I've thought a lot about it. I have a friend whose wife has had Alzheimer's for about 15, 17 years. And he said, Alzheimer's is death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's a good way to describe it. And so with each of those paper cuts comes another round of grief. There's coming to terms with what you see yourself losing. There's something else that we've talked about as you come to terms with what you're not going to have anymore.
Right.
And because somebody told me that a term for this is unconventional grief. Conventional grief is your father dies, your best friend dies. You go through the whole long process of grieving that loss. Yeah. But this, living with an Alzheimer's patient, or in several other situations where there's really no cure, it's a constant, slow, or maybe not so slow, degeneration, and a constant set of losses, new every week.
Yes. Yeah.
And so coping with the grief of that is a different challenge.
Sure.
And the book I mentioned about lament, I think, helps that. Here's what I would say. I think that it's important with any kind of grief to embrace the grief, to acknowledge it, to speak the loss, and then to say, okay, what will I do now that I've lost that? I can't just acknowledge it. I have to do something with it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've talked about this a lot. I think that so much of life is about balance. And, I can either be stingy or I can be a spendthrift. Neither one of those is good. I need to be generous, but I need to manage my money well. Okay, that's an everyday example. I think when you're coming to the issue of grief, you can either deny it and, God's really blessing me. Everything's fine. I'm okay. Or you can wallow in it. My life is awful. This is terrible. I don't know how I can ever cope without this person that I've lost, or how will I ever live the life that we're not going to have now? How can I?
Right.
And those extremes is healthy. I think that acknowledging the grief and then saying, okay, what are we going to do in the midst of how are we going to cope with the grief?
Yeah.
What can we contribute to the world, even in the midst of the losses? That's a challenge.
Yeah.
That's a challenge. And in the case of an Alzheimer's patient, it's an ongoing challenge because, I used to be able to leave the house and not worry about it. But then my wife went wandering one afternoon. So I thought, okay, I can't do that anymore. That's a loss.
Oh, yes.
We went to things together, but now she really can't sit through them anymore. So not going to those things anymore is a loss, or going with somebody other than her.
Yeah.
That vacation that I took on by myself with my family was great, but it was a loss.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
So I think the only way to cope with grief, though, is to acknowledge it, and to those stages of grief are some people don't acknowledge, don't think that they're quite as real as we might have thought. But the thing that for sure about those stages of grief is that they're not linear. It's not a prescription. It's not like sand the wall, prime the wall, paint the wall. Now the wall's painted. It's not linear like that.
Right.
You go back and forth through those various stages in
Yes.
any kind of grief.
Yeah.
That's true in this situation too. Sometimes you're angry. Sometimes you just don't want to deny it, or you don't want to acknowledge it. You do deny it.
Right.
Sometimes you're afraid. I think that for me, since I do talk a lot, I like to talk. I think for me that having the support group to say things like that too is helpful.
Oh,
Yeah,
of course.
I bet.
Absolutely.
Well, so one of the things that we're doing in this season that we've not done in previous seasons is asking our guests if they would share one thing about Jesus. If there's just like one thing you could say, what would that be?
I've thought a lot about that, and I don't think my answer is any more is unique from what others would say. But I would settle on the word grace.
Oh.
I've been forgiven for a lot, and that's part of the motivation I have to do what I'm doing, because I owe it to someone who showed me a lot of grace, and that's inspired by Jesus.
Yeah.
Grace.
Oh,
absolutely.
Amen. I was just flipping through channels and landed on a Christian radio station this week, and it was a new song. I don't know it, and I couldn't really tell you the name of it, but she just kept singing about the name of Jesus, the name of Jesus. And then when I did my business, came back and got back in the car and turned on a different song, the name of Jesus, the name of Jesus. And it's that, I mean, it's just so powerful. And that grace that he gives us, you're right. It's so.
And the grace that he's shown, of course.
Oh
yes.
yeah.
It's kind of unfathomable when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that here I am, a little speck in time, a little speck in the universe, literally, not even a speck. And the fact that God is concerned about me, would answer my prayers,
Yes.
would go ahead of me and work things out that need. It's
Amen.
incomprehensible.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Yes.
Well, for our listeners who might want to know about this Jesus that we're talking about, if you don't know, we do have some resources on our website. You can go to www.projectbrickworks.org/Jesus.
Yep.
And then always feel free to reach out to us. We're super easy to find and
On social media all the time.
and we'll call you back or whatever.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah.
But we'd love to share, the Jesus that we're talking about with you. So.
Absolutely. Well, and Mark, you mentioned the name Unchosen Journey several times, so I'm just going to say it again.
Oh, yes.
But then if you will also share with us how folks can get in touch with you and your blog.
Well, you can go to unchosenjourney.com, and I think there's a contact button at the bottom of the website that'll send me an email to Mark, or here, this is the address. It's just mark@unchosenjourney.com. And I get a lot of, in my other Gmail account, I get a lot of junk. And so I don't put that email out there because these do not receive as many messages. I always see them and I always answer them. They don't get lost in the hubbub.
Yeah.
So mark@unchosenjourney.com. I'd be delighted to know somebody listened to this and wants to talk more. Be delighted.
Oh, yeah. Amen. And are you on social media at all?
Yeah, I am on Facebook.
And you post your blogs there too.
I always post a link to my blog there, and that's
Yeah.
where it gets most of its traffic, frankly.
Yeah.
Right.
There are a number. There's about 175 subscribers, which is great, but it's discovered much more widely via Facebook. And I know Facebook's kind of passe, but a lot of people, it's people my age that are on Facebook who are doing the caregiving. So,
well, that's true. No, we have way more views on Facebook
than anything else.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
for sure. We're with you on that.
I'm on Twitter too. I don't make a big. I gave you my Twitter address. I don't even remember what it is.
It's Mark Taylor 1950.
There it is, Mark Taylor 1950. So I am on Twitter also, and when I think about it, I link the blog to my Twitter account too, which is probably it's something I should do more of. But anyway, yeah, that's the extent of my social media presence.
Excellent.
Well, I already know somebody that I'm going to be calling and telling
Me
them
too.
that they need to check this out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your willingness to share, and just the compassion you have for folks who are walking similar walks, and just all the effort you're putting in to make this blog and to have it be a blessing to others. It's just incredible.
Encouraging.
And
yeah.
it's so encouraging.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely.
It's a blessing.
Have a great rest of your day.
God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast with Mark. This podcast is made possible through generous listeners and friends like you, and we are so very grateful to all of our supporters. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can head over to thecollaborationconversation.org and click sponsor an episode.
For more information on Project Brickworks, visit us online at projectbrickworks.org. Subscribe to our newsletter or text BRICK to 55498 to get the latest news and updates. We love y'all. Be blessed, and we'll see you next time.